G'day. Today we're doing a repair on a Ford Territory 2005 model, and the owner's complaining when it's cruising along on the highway at 100 the tacho's moving up and down slightly, so torque converter clutch is probably coming on and off. So we'll just put the scan tool on there and just see if we can get any fault codes out of it. Just plug in the dongle, contact on, turn the fan off, and what do we got? Australian Ford, there you go. Okay, and we've got a PO960 pressure control solenoid A. And there we've got the possible causes. Line pressure solenoid current, harness wiring, but it doesn't mention that it can be a contaminated solenoid. So we've got the ZF6HP26, and how you ID these, you'll see there's a little number there, a little bit hard to see, 0266369 at the top and 020058 on the bottom, and that'll tell you which solenoid kit you buy for these particular transmissions. You check the unis, centre bearing, looks like he's had a new one put on not long ago. The diff, the transfer case or the centre diff fluid level. This is an all-wheel drive one. And to get the pan off, we need to take this little cross member here out of the way. Just also the connector sleeve there where the plug goes into the Mechatronic unit, they're prone to leaking as well. Check the fluid level before you start any work. Just make sure that the transmission cools right down before you take it off. If you take them off warm or hot, the plastic will actually warp or be out of shape and you'll get leaking issues. Young bloke's a little bit quick here. To pull out the plug out of the case connector sleeve, there's a little tang there. You just push it anti-clockwise and that'll just push out of the sleeve itself, and then you need to just slightly push that case connector sleeve in, press this little tang here on this fork and slide it down, and that'll allow you to pull that case connector out. That's that jigger there. And you'll also notice there's a little locator tang there, and that's at about 530 if looking at it. We're going to replace all the solenoids in this. You'll notice there's bigger and smaller Torx Plus bolts. We're going to remove all the bigger ones, and that's what's actually holding the valve body to the case. Good idea to just loosen them all first. Have one or two out all the way and just a couple of threads in, and then we can take them all out and just let that oil drain out. This one's cool, so you don't have to worry about burning yourself, but if you are removing this, make sure you let the valve body cool right down before you take the Mechatronic plate off, or the plastic can actually warp Alright, you can see that that's all loose now. We've got 2 bolts on the valve body. Let it drain out a little bit. Just jiggle a little bit. Yep. Now this here is the bridge seal. If you've got a delay in reverse, selecting reverse and drive, sometimes these bridge seals flatten out or leak there. And you can also see these tubes here, the rubber tubes, they should be sticking out about 5 mil, and they've flattened out as well. When they're not sticking out like that, you'll end up losing pressure between the valve body and that seal. Okay, and while we've got the valve body out, we're going to do a air pressure test on the clutch packs. I don't know if you can hear that, but that one's applying nicely, that's not leaking or anything. Sometimes you need to let a bit of the oil come out because it's got a hydraulic lock on the piston there. So some oil will come out the first time. You can hear that one applying nicely. And you can also see a couple of clutch packs there, how they're working. Just yep, try that. You can see that one there is applying. Yep. So before anyone says that this transmission's cactus, the oil is pretty dark in it, but customers been explained the situation and they're willing to give it a crack, changing the tubes there, pressure tubes, changing the bridge seal and seeing how it goes. Okay, we've got the tube seals. You can see the bridge connector, and now you'll have a look. You've got these sensors here, one there and one over here. There's also a temperature sensor. I'll show you when we get all the oil out of it. 2 bolts over here. There's 1 bolt over here. And there's 2 bolts over here. So you don't have to remove all the bolts, but if you flip that over carefully, you'll be able to see which bolts you need to remove the Mechatronic plate. Now you can see these 2 we're going to remove. They go into here and here, and you'll see that on the other end you've got these here. Over here we've got the range sensor. You'll see that will quite often attract a lot of fine metal, and they have a magnetic pickup that tells the computer what you're trying to do, whether you're in park, reverse, neutral or drive. The actual select mechanism will only go park, reverse, neutral and drive. The other gears, so it's got another 5 gears, 6-gear transmissions, or 6-speed transmission, it's actually selected electronically. Now we can remove the Mechatronic plate. They are securely located on these 2 pins here, so it is a tight fit, and you've got to take it off nice and evenly. Make sure you don't damage anything as you're pulling it off. And along this side here, the Mechatronic, the contact pins will be stuck in the solenoids. As you pull it up, you just have to keep jiggling it until the solenoids release it. Over here we're stuck on that pin. off a little bit quicker than I expected. There we go. They're the little contact points that are locating into the solenoids. And over here we can slide that range sensor out. You can see how it's got a lot of that fine metal there. So we can clean that off as well. Put that aside in a safe place so it doesn't get damaged. And now we can just remove these bolts that are holding solenoids in place and pull them out. It's a good idea to actually number them. I always number them from where your manual shaft is, going that way. But you've got to take note, you don't want to mix up these colours. Yellow, green, sometimes they're blue as well. And what the difference with these are, apart from the resistance in them, is some are normally open, some are normally closed. One of them's a pressure control solenoid. Don't just loosen them straight off with the tech gun, you'll damage the little points in the bolt. Always a good idea to hand loosen them, and then you can use your tech gun. Now you can just wriggle them out. You can see there's a lot of rubbish in that one. So that one's pretty dirty. A little bit of muck in there, but the filter's doing its job. Now to test these solenoids, you can demagnetise them, flush them out, and you actually test these using vacuum. Ideally, you also need to warm them up. Bench testing quite often will show you that they're operating okay, but the issue is that coils often fail when they warm up. You can also get aftermarket solenoids. I prefer to use the genuine ZF ones. And like I explained earlier, there are different types, different colour codings, normally open or normally closed. And you'll see these ones are green, but they are actually the same as the blue ones. If you don't have a tester, ideally you always want to order them for your vehicle, because sometimes you will run into problems fitting a solenoid that's normally open where it should be normally closed, or vice versa. Okay, we've got our vacuum tester there. Keeps going out of focus. So ideally I've got the end of the hose there, vacuum hose, and if I turn it on, I'm just going to take a reference point where, when it's completely blocked off, where the reading is. And you can see that's at 21 inches of vacuum. So we know 21 inches of vacuum is 100% sealed with the vacuum. The reason why you don't calibrate it at zero vacuum is because we're at atmospheric pressure right now. We're not at zero vacuum, if that makes sense. So anyway, I've calibrated it, so when it's completely sealed, it's making 21. You can put it up to 25 or whatever reading you want, but that's your reference point. You know, when it's 100% sealed, it will be at that reading, if that makes sense. Now I've got our little tester, we'll stick that in there. And we'll get the new one, the new solenoid, put it in. And we're just testing for leakage only. Some of these solenoids, if you get on the sonax.com website, that's SONNAX, it'll show you how to test these solenoids, and also which ones need to be energized to be testing them with vacuum and which ones you don't. So I just cap off this because there's a little bleed hole through there. If we turn that on, we've actually got 20 inches of vacuum. So 100% sealed was 21 inches of vacuum, and this one is sealing at 20 inches of vacuum. So that's very good. Means it's almost perfect. Alright, so I'll test this one first. That's the old one. And we've actually got 17 inches of vacuum there. So that one's leaking a little bit. Put that one there. This one. We've got 19 and a half inches of vacuum. And that one goes up here. And the lucky last one of this colour we have 17 and a half inches of vacuum. So they are leaking a little bit. And there's the new one again. And you can see that one's snapping to just a tad over 20 inches of vacuum. And we'll just test the maximum vacuum again. I'm just taking that out and just capping it off 100%. And that's going to 21 inches of vacuum. So they are leaking a little bit, so it's a good idea to replace them. And just again, just remember that this is just a leak test. It's not testing the coil, and it's not also testing the coil when it's warmed up. Now we've got the new set there. We have a yellow one. Then we have the black one. Then we have a green one, but they're actually blue. Blue, blue, yellow, blue, yellow. Push them all in. Be careful you don't cut the seals when you're pushing them in. Sort of twist it slightly. Have a bit of oil there. You'll notice on the end of these there's a little slot there. This little bracket, the bracket that holds them, actually goes into that slot. There will be a little bit of movement. Later when we put the Mechatronic plate on, we'll try and adjust it so the contact is central. You don't want it sort of sitting to one side or something like that. Okay, solenoids are back on. I haven't tightened them up 100%. You can still twist them left and right. And we'll leave that till after we put the Mechatronic plate back on. We've given this a good clean. We use the X55 or the 1215 solvent before anyone asks. The Mechatronic plates are very delicate, so be very gentle with it so you don't damage anything or bump it. You've got speed sensors, input and output. You've got the little fork there. Make sure you don't bend that out of shape or anything like that. And just remember, when you're pushing that in, you've got to put the tension on the connector sleeve to be able to push this fork back up. And we've also had the range sensor right out, and we've given that a good clean as well. And that is magnetic. You can see, what do we got? Something magnetic there. Okay, so we need to line up the selector with that little pin there. Just line up those pins there with the holes. Sometimes the pins will come out with the Mechatronic plate. Sometimes they'll stay in the valve body. You can see one stayed there and one came out. And don't forget to just line up that range sensor with the selector there. And the idea is to get the plate on evenly. You don't want it twisting or anything like that when you're getting it on. Just go down evenly. And don't forget the manual linkage there to line it up. Up this end it's going to be going in a little bit harder than over here because we're pushing the Mechatronic plate into the solenoids. And you can actually just squeeze it there. It'll just help push them back into the solenoids there. There we go. All the bolts that go into the Mechatronic, they're all the same length. We tighten the Mechatronic plate 8 Newton meter, and all the other bolts are 6 Newton meter. Before you tighten these up, just give the solenoids a little bit of a wiggle, just so it sits in its own little place. Sometimes you can give them a bit of a wiggle, sometimes you can't. And tighten these up as well. Ready to go back in the vehicle. We've got the connector sleeves there, the little rubber sleeves. The 2 shorter ones go in the middle, then you've got the longer one and the longest to the outer side. There we go, we've got the sleeves back in. The 2 shortest ones, the longer one and the longest one on the outside. And the 2 outer ones will actually stick out a little bit because it's actually shaping around that center support there. The 2 middle ones, they're sitting pretty flat on the top, but the outer ones have to sort of seal around like that. And they do have to actually, you can see they're a little bit raised. It's probably about a 5mm clearance there. It's sticking out about 5mm. When the valve body comes up, it'll press up against that and push it in. And we've got the new bridge seal. Well, that's transmission goo. So as soon as the temperature gets up in the oil, it'll dissolve that. And we just put that bridge seal there, and it should just sit there till we get the valve body up. There we go. And it will be a little bit raised because those seals, you can see they stick out a lot more than the other ones. So, and you want to have the tension of the rubber sealing that join there. Before we put the valve body on, just make sure it's nice and clean there where the case connector sleeve goes in. And when you're getting the valve body up, don't forget to align that little manual shaft there with that little pin there. Just put all the bolts in and then evenly bolt it up. The reason why is because those seals will be sticking out a little bit and they need to be pressed up evenly. Now we've got the old case connector sleeve. You can see the rubber O-rings have flattened out. And the new one. That little pin on the bottom, that sort of goes in at about 5/30. And also, before you can get that fork up, you've got to keep tension on this because these rubber O-rings will be constantly trying to push it out. So you'll probably try and push the fork in and go, "Hey, this isn't going in." But what you got to do is keep the tension on there while you push the fork in, and it'll just slide in. You don't need to tap anything with a hammer or force anything. It should just slide in nice and evenly. I've put a bit of oil on there just so it slides in a bit easier, and the pin goes in, you can see that little pin there, at 5/30. You just have to find it. See, if I go like this and just, there it is, and then you just wiggle it in. They do go in hard, especially when you've got new O-rings. There we go, all back in. It is difficult. You've got to make sure you're pushing the top side in, or making sure it slides in evenly. And like I said, it is a little bit difficult to do on your own. You've got to be pushing it in pretty hard, but this fork should just slide in easily. Do not force it or you'll break something. Before we put the plug in, give it a bit of a squirt with some WD. And again, you've got that little slot there that's at 530. We put that in, and as you keep the tension on the plug, and as you wind it down, it should just pull it back in. There we go. And it just pulls it back in. And you've got to go right down until you feel that little click. There'll be a little click right at the end. And that's it. That plugs in. Now, before you put the new plastic pan on, you can get an upgrade kit where you put a steel pan on, and then you don't have to replace the whole jigger. You just replace the filter and pan gasket. Make sure you have a look in there. Make sure there's no bits of plastic or anything in there. O-ring as well. Double check that. Double check all your work. Make sure you've done all the bolts up. You can go through and just make sure you've nipped everything up. Magnets are on. You can see they have what they call a lifetime oil, but it's actually while it's in warranty, lifetime oil. You can do services on those. The filling temperature is between 30 and 50 degrees, you can see, 86 to 122 Fahrenheit. If you go over temperature, you've got to let it cool down to that range, or the oil will have expanded and you'll have an incorrect oil level reading when the oil cools down. If you're under 30, same thing, you'll probably overfill the transmission. And then what can happen, the oil, because it's expanded, hits the spinning parts, aerates the oil, and you have a similar problem as if you haven't got enough oil. You can see the pan's incorporating the filter, so the oil does sit fairly, or the pickup for the filter sits in the oil pretty low. And you're trying to push the filter pickup into that hole, and then we just put the bolts on. Filler plugs over here, 8mm Allen key. Whiz that off. We're going to fill it up with the Tritec Multi-Trans full synthetic fluid. You can also use the original Lifeguard 6 fluid, or any compatible fluid. You can use, we also use a Penrite. Fill it up till it's just coming out of here, hop up in the vehicle, start it up, turn the vehicle off, top it up again. Second time it's coming out, you can leave the motor running, and the idea is to fill it with the motor running and have the oil level at between 30 and 50 degrees. Not less, not over, ideally about 40 degrees, and it should be just trickling out of there. There we go. We put about 5.5 litres went in because we've taken the valve body off, and you can see it's still too cold. It's just trickling out. Coming out, we're on about 20 degrees there, so we're just going to let it idle and it'll warm up to about 30 degrees. That excess oil will come out. If you fill it when it's under 30, it'll actually be over full, and you don't want it hitting the spinning parts. It'll aerate the oil. There you go, all back together. Temperature's up to about 35 to 40 degrees. It was just trickling out here. You can also check the temperature on these with a scan tool. That'll give you the internal transmission temperature. But you can also use those digital thermometers Just make sure you aim it at the front and back and just get a medium or average temperature there. It's usually close enough. Cross members back on. Job's all done. Anyway, hope that's helped. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave any questions or comments in the section below. Throw me a beer or three if any of this information has helped. And thank you for watching.